We finally made it to December, the end of the year. Did I meet my goal? Depends. Do Christmas gifts count toward my total bought even though I didn't actually spend any money on them? I don't know. Regardless, I had a ton of fun showing you the minis I painted this year, and I fully intend on continuing to do so going into 2023. This was a massive year of improvement for me, but I want to reserve most of that kind of talk for the end of the video. In the meantime, let's look at the last minis I painted this year. The fifth member of my Horns of Hashut warband, this is a one-handed demolisher striding confidently into battle. I just didn't glue a shield onto one of the shield arms. There's not much to say here except for the fact that the recipe for the skin tone was Rakarth's flesh mixed with Wraithbone and given a wash of Druchii Violet. Druchii Violet? Druchii Violet? Druchii Violet. Everything else was basically standard. These guys are so visually similar in terms of their armor and weaponry that I really feel like going over my exact recipe for every single time I paint one of these guys isn't really necessary. It becomes very paint by numbers. You know, paint the metal bits metal, paint the cloth bits different cloth colors. I don't really feel like there's much to go over. And if my progress on the warband is slow, that's why. It's honestly really burnout inducing to paint this many nearly identical guys. It can drag on you really quickly. Not that I hate the models, it just gets repetitive. More Custodes for my Stoneguard shield host, and the first Sister of Silence for the army as well. I'm still working through the contents of the Shadow Throne box, but now I'm almost done. I built the Sisters as Vigilators because they're my favorite Sisters of Silence unit, and now I only have the rest of the Vigilator squad to paint. After that, I'm done with Shadow Throne. The Shield Captain was quite fun to paint. One of the things I really like about Custodes is that all of their HQ units are actually just kit-bashed versions of the regular line units, which means I could run this guy as a shield captain, or I could run him as a regular Alaris Custodian if I wanted my Terminator unit to have more bodies. That kind of flexibility makes list building with Custodes so much fun, because even with only the basic Custodian Guard kit, you have access to most of the units in your army. You can run them as Wardens, as Shield Captains, Vexillus Praetors, and the same applies for every other Custodes kit. I could have built these Sisters as Witch Seekers or Prosecutors, for instance. I really like the way the eye hole turned out for the Shield Captain. The socket was painted over white, and then a thick coat of Pilar Glacier was slapped on top of it, which was also how I did the plasma gun on the Chaplain from the last episode. You get the best effect if you completely fill in the eye hole with Pilar Glacier, to the point where it looks like it might overflow. It's a contrast paint, so as it dries, it won't harden, it'll just seek out crevices and create a really convincing glow effect. Aside from that, the Shield Captain was exactly how I painted the other Terminators. I briefly debated whether or not I should paint the Vigilator in the same scheme, since Sisters of Silence aren't technically members of the shield host they fight with, but I decided that aesthetic cohesion was more important than sticking 100% to the lore. So we'll just say that whatever curse afflicted these Custodes also tagged their allies from the other Talon of the Emperor. Great models. I'm so close to being done with the Shadow Throne box. Next up, we have the two remaining Ogre Gluttons from the last episode. I don't actually run these guys as having Iron Fists on the tabletop, by the way. I just think they look cool. I didn't really know what to do with the banner because the box didn't come with any transfer sheets and I don't really know what I'd freehand on there, but looking at the box art, it seems like the banner is supposed to have like the image of a maw on it, but I just left it blank. The Ogre Gluttons kit is one of my favorites. I love how simple and intuitive they are to put together. The flesh of the Sword Ogre is Wraithbone mixed with Deathguard Green and washed with Reikland Flesh Shade. I really think ogres should lean in more to having weird, inhuman skin tones to really push the Uncanny Valley effect and make them look just that bit more monstrous, instead of just being big and fat humans. All of my ogres, and in fact all of my destruction armies in the future, are members of the same mercenary company, Drekka's Devourers. Drekka's Devourers are a very well-renowned mercenary company across Gur, with even an army of Iron Jaws led by a mighty mega-boss under the command of the mighty Butcher Tyrant Drekka. Very few have actually seen Drekka in person, and legends abound about what they must have done or proved to be capable of in order to gain control of these disparate warbands across Gur and unite them into something truly terrifying. This is a test mini for a new chapter of Space Marines I'm currently writing my own book about, the White Eagles. Successors of the Dark Angels, the White Eagles had a rough start because they were founded without prior knowledge of the Dark Angels, a successor of a successor, and so the Dark Angels immediately declared the White Eagles to be conspirators with the Fallen and sought their absolute destruction at a campaign now known as the Angel Wars. The Angel Wars ended when the Inquisition stepped in with a battle company of Black Templars, which led to the Dark Angels ending hostilities quickly so as to avoid entering a protracted military campaign against the forces of the wider Imperium itself. No one wants a repeat of the Badab War. However, the White Eagles were reduced from full chapter strength to barely being able to muster 3 battle companies. Their misfortunes did not end there, though, as the Inquisition used the fact that inquisitorial forces saved their hide to strong-arm an abnormally large Deathwatch tithe onto the already struggling White Eagles. This forced them to adapt their strategies around their lack of manpower. Scavenging for supplies and guerrilla warfare tactics became the name of the game, as the White Eagles simply lacked the numbers to launch full frontal assaults. This is exemplified in this model, an Astartes of the White Eagles chapter who is donned in what can be described as heresy pattern power armor, or in other words, power armor kit-bashed from various different armor marks, and wielding a chain axe he likely looted from the corpse of a Chaos Space Marine. From a painting perspective, this guy was a struggle from start to finish. I tried to go for a more cream or egg-colored white, like Deathwing armor, but with a lighter midtone. To do that, I painted the armor 2 thin coats of Rakarth flesh, and then layered up with pallid witch flesh. How many coats of pallid witch flesh? 7. 7 coats of pallid witch flesh. I then washed it with Nuln Oil and went back with a dry brush highlight of pallid witch flesh to re-establish the midtone. All in all, I really like how it turned out, but getting from point A to point B was one of the biggest slogs in my painting career. I felt like I was fighting the paint the whole time, and we're not even going to talk about Troll Slayer Orange on the shoulder pads. I definitely want to keep making models for this faction, but I'm definitely going to have to refine this recipe. Otherwise, I'm just going to burn out trying to paint anything other than a kill team. I have a few theories, like just priming the model white, washing it with Reikland Flesh Shade, and then dry brushing it an off-white color, but more experimentation is necessary before I start pumping these guys out in large numbers. This was actually a fun one. I recently started playing Gloomhaven, and because I'm extra, I decided to paint my class model. I went with the Enox Brute. One thing I both like and dislike about Gloomhaven is the lore's relationship with fantasy tropes. One of the things that makes Gloomhaven special is that they don't use any of the classic fantasy trope races. No elves, orcs, dwarves, etc. Except, and this is one of my biggest snags with the setting, they still kinda do. Enox Brutes are a race of savage barbarian warriors who are looked down upon by polite society for being unintelligent, and instead opt to live in small nomadic tribes out in the wilderness. In other words, it's a fantasy orc. It's an orc in all but name, and the fact that they look like Swamp Thing, which is where my color scheme choices came from. I decided to make the skin this kind of bright green color, both as an allusion to the fact that these guys are literally just orcs, but pretending not to be orcs, and also their weird visual similarities to Swamp Thing. This was my first time using a variation on the slap chop method. So now you can officially say I've made a slap chop video. But instead of the regular slap chop method, I used the variation discussed in the most recent Goobertown Hobbies video, the one about dry brushing white over black. Specifically, I went with Wraithbone so that the undercoat would have a warmer, more natural color temperature. And yeah, I gotta admit, I love how the model turned out. To get the skin tone, I used Auric Flesh mixed with a little bit of Wraithbone, and everything else was pretty paint by numbers. The biggest hurdle I had with this mini was the poor quality sculpt, in comparison to 28mm and above heroic and true scale wargaming models at least. It was impossible to tell what material the bracers were supposed to be, and there's some stuff that sticks off the model that I can't tell if it was intentional detail or like a casting error, because if it is intentional detail, I have no idea what intentional detail it's supposed to be. In general, the Gloomhaven model line is impressive for a board game, but therein lies the problem. It's impressive for a board game, and the flaws in the models gave me a few interesting problems I had to find solutions for, which actually made it pretty fun to paint. It was like a little janky painting puzzle. As the final minis of December, and thus the year, we have 3 Skorpek Destroyers. On Christmas Day, my brother gave unto me a boon, a blessing that he had received from an enigmatic and mysterious second-hand miniature seller who we only know as Frank Odin. I don't think that's his actual name, but my brother found a guy who was selling off some of his Warhammer collection for really cheap and bought me essentially the Indominus box and some extras for only like $100. So I am now in possession of just over 1,000 points of Necrons without ever actually intentionally collecting Necrons. These models were extremely quick to paint, as all Necron models are. Base coated the entire model in Leadbelcher, picked out the faceplate and the Ankh of the Triarch in Balthazar Gold, and then went back in to wash the whole thing in Nuln Oil before painting the blades with Warp Lightning and giving it a gloss varnish to emphasize the glow effect. These guys took, combined, an hour to paint, and for that amount of effort, I'm pleased as punch with the result. It's kind of crazy how easy these guys are to paint. Oh, but of course, you've noticed my guys have a custom paint scheme, which means I have lore. Before the reawakening of the Necrons in the 41st millennium, before the birth of She Who Thirsts, before even the conclusion of the War in Heaven, over 65 million years ago, the Necron tier who would come to be known as the Inaket dynasty resisted the fate of their kind as long as they could. Fighting to the last, they were dragged to the living metal forges in shackles or as corpses, instead of simply submitting to a fate of eternal servitude. They are now one of the most spiteful, grudge-bearing Necron dynasties, seeing all other Necrons as fools for having not joined them when they stood their ground against the Catan. Some say there is no greater hatred in this galaxy than the hatred born from the contempt the Inaket dynasty holds all other Necrons in. They will not bow to the Silent King, as so many already have, and if Zarek wants to force them to bend the knee, he will have quite the battle waiting for him in the Eastern Fringe. This they are sure of. Thank you so much for watching the first 5 months of this painting log. I started doing this series in July after taking a 7 or 8 month long break from painting, and it really helped keep my motivation up to know that I wasn't just painting for myself, I was painting for all of you. So with that being said, let's get into some statistics. Firstly, this was the biggest year of growth for my miniatures collection, having collected over 1,000 points of Space Marines, Ogres, and Necrons. Add all that together and the few armies I started collecting in 2022, and I gained somewhere in the ballpark of 5,000 points worth of models in 2022. This was also a year of firsts for me. My first Dreadnought, my first Chaplain, my first Ogre, my first Battletech, Warcry, Age of Sigmar, and Blood Bowl miniatures. I tried new techniques, I played new games, and I even made some new friends. This was, bar none, the best year in the hobby for me. But let's find out the all-important question. Did I reach my goal? Did I paint more than I bought? Yes, but only barely. My final ratio of models bought versus models painted this year is 118 models bought versus 120 models painted. I reached my goal only just barely. So let's up the ante. By this time, 2023, I will not only have painted more than I bought, I will have painted everything. Yes, everything. I'm setting myself the goal of painting my entire pile of plastic shame. I have no idea how many models I'd need to paint per month to reach that goal. I don't even know if it's feasible to do that, given how much faster I'd have to paint in comparison to how fast I buy new models. But I'm shooting for the stars here, so it's fine if I overaim just a little, right? Thank you so much for watching 2022's painting logs. Have a happy new year, live long, and prosper.